This is the first video I'm making in a series about British HO rolling stock. A lot of people don't know or are not aware that several manufacturers over the years have attempted to break into the British and Irish market with HO rather than a double O gauge rolling stock. Double O gauge is by far the biggest scale for modelling by miles, by a million miles in both the UK and Ireland. And HO, despite some valiant efforts and some really beautiful models, particularly ones made by Fleischmann and Marklin over the years, has never really taken off. Lima gave it a really good go in the 1970s, and they produced a series of HO models of British prototypes and Irish ones, including two locos, a Class 33 and a 4F steam locomotive. Now, I've got a fair bit of HO British rolling stock that I've collected over the last 40 years or so. Picked up a lot of it for pennies, junk really, some of it. And among these is this Jouef HO Royal Mail travelling post office. These were carriages that ran on British Rail, and what they did was they had a cage on one side that collected the mail off hanging platforms along the track, so the train could collect mail and deliver mail without actually stopping at high speed. They also performed the function of being mini post offices. Post office workers were inside them overnight, and they would be sorting all the different mail for the different stations en route. So it was actually a very clever idea. This model was later released by Playcraft, still made by Jouef in France, as an operating version, which is quite a fun accessory, where it would pick up little mail bags and drop them off at another location on your layout. This is the basic version from the early 1960s of a British Rail Royal Mail travelling post office. Now, the first thing you notice is that it's rather toy-like. It's very shiny, translucent plastic, particularly the body, which is ridiculously translucent. Too bright, the details don't show up. The ends molded in black plastic, but I don't think that's correct. I've looked online and they seem to be either red or black, so in the end I compromised with painting them red and heavily weathering them. I'm not sure if this is based on an actual prototype. I've looked around and this is not even on the British HO Society's website. If you go to the website britishho.com, it shows you models that are available off the shelf in HO scale. This is not included, which suggests to me it's maybe not the most accurate model. It could be too, I don't know. People out there who are experts would probably tell me. Either way, I think it looks quite good. Ventilation fans on the roof don't make a lot of sense, as probably molded for various coaches. So looking at the model, what do we have to do? We have to make it look less plastic and bring it up to something that will look good in terms of HO scale, less toy-like. On either end, the couplers are a bit strange. They look like a hybrid of British and European-style couplers. The plastic trucks, as usual, are that brittle plastic that Jouef used in the 60s that I've had to coat in very thin Tamina plastic cement. The same for the battery boxes and the undercarriage. I was going to replace the wheels with metal ones, but they are metal axle pinpoint wheels and they run fairly well. They've got the thick, what the Americans call pizza cutter flanges. So taking the body apart, you can see inside that the main body is molded in this one-piece bright plastic, which is way too bright for the livery that this prototype carried. The clear plastic inserts are actually glued on, so I can't remove them. There was no weight inside, and the underframe detail, very rudimentary, came off easy enough. It was all screwed together, typical Jouef style from the period. The roof kind of clipped in at the end. First thing I did was I spray painted the roof. A more sun-baked, should we say, light grey. I just basically used a primer. Left that to dry. While I did that, I decided to work on the body and tone it down. Now, how I did this was I used these new kinds of paints that have come out in recent years. Games Workshop call them Citadel Colour Contrast Paints. The one I used, Army Paint or Speed Paint. Now, what they are is they are paints that have a very thinly distributed molecules of colour inside them. They're designed to paint over models that have been spray painted grey or white, and due to gravity and capillary action, the pigments cluster mostly in folds, in joints, in areas where you would have natural pooling, and it creates an artificial shadowing. I've already done a few models with this, and it's a wonderful way of taking the plasticky look off a model. I much prefer the Army Painter speed paints. They're thinner, they're lighter, they don't have the same thickness or viscosity that the Games Workshop has. I decided to use a coating of Fire Giant Orange by Army Painter on top of the existing Jouef Red, letting it run down and falling into the various corners and details, and using a brush, constantly removing the paint using a handy wipe. Took the paint off the Royal Mail text as well as the numbers to try and keep them preserved. This way I can tone down, darken, bring out the details but not lose the original decals, or worse still, have to invest in money on a model like this. Now, this is a personal thing. You can go at this, and it also is bespoke from model to model. You can go at this as hard as you like, use as much paint as you want. I put on fairly thick coats of this stuff. It all pools down the bottom, and you can use a Q-tip to remove it, or you can use a brush that's wet. Result looks not only naturally weathered, but also is much closer to the colour of the real thing. There was no weights inside the model, so before I dealt with the problem with the translucent I put 2 car weights just above the bogies, or the trucks as Americans call them, to give a bit of weight and help with stability when running. So I took the easy way out, and it's a good way out. I just put folded black cardstock, like construction paper type material, inside it, and that dealt with the translucent problem perfectly. I put the roof back on and allowed it all to dry properly, painted the ends red, and then heavily wetted them with washes of black. Then I worked on the trucks and the underframe details. I painted them with Vallejo German camouflage, or German C, black brown. This is a great colour for painting underframes of rolling stock. It's not quite black, it's not quite brown. And the details, I picked out Tamiya accent colour, the orange-brown one, which gives a slight effect of rust. And here is the finished model after it's all been assembled, and I'm sure you can see the difference is quite remarkable. And it didn't take much. On top of changing the couplers to the standard European type, I also made rudimentary corridor connections from folded black card, the same as what I used to black out the inside, and it added quite nicely to it. When everything was finished and dried, I sprayed the whole thing with a matte varnish. And so there it is. It's now quite a nice model. I've used Sharpie pens to pick out the platform safety lights on either side of the doors. I also use Sharpies to paint the black safety handles on the 2 doors, as well as the mesh cage that pops out and catches the mail as it goes by, without hiding the red behind it. So a fun project, took me an afternoon, and I'm looking forward to the next part of this British Hey Joe project.